our proposal, we haven't won the competition yet. That's the only thing I would adjust in your program. We're still in the process of. So the drawings that you're going to see are in progress, and we hopefully will be selected by HUD to go forward with this project in a month or so. The project is really about integrating flood protection for Hunts Point with a number of other kinds of community-specific resilience measures. The project is organized around these 5 lifelines, which I'll describe. Hunts Point is a working waterfront. We call it a significant maritime industrial area. This is the heart of the food supply for 22 million people, 20,000 jobs, many of them living wage jobs, are connected to this zone right here. This is the produce market, the Fulton Fish Market, the meat co-op, and a number of other critical businesses, including Anheuser-Busch. And
that is critical.
There are a lot of chemicals stored in this area, and there's also an area here on the coast where there are a lot of oil refineries. So in a flood event, a lot of that material also becomes, it's moving around. There's a sewage treatment plant, which is the lowest one in New York City and the highest priority one for protection with the water authority there. And this working waterway is also situated right in the poorest, the South Bronx is the poorest congressional district in the country. What we're proposing to do is to create a levee as the flood protection that is this orange line that gets integrated with greenways and public space and a number of other measures, and to use that greenway to protect this enormous industrial floodplain, which is where all of the jobs, living wage and entrepreneurship opportunities for that poor congressional district and many areas in the region. We think all of the significant maritime industrial areas in New York are in the floodplain. So we're looking at Hunts Point as a place that we can try to develop a new hybrid. The combination of a working waterfront, a real industrial waterfront, not a residential area, not a beach, and a working community and a lot of ecology. And if we can do that, it becomes useful in all of these other areas in the region that are also looking to protect the industrial maritime assets. You see in red here, this is the food distribution center. There are a number of businesses outside those core buildings that are part of the food cluster, but over time, over the next 35 years, the risk is expected to increase enormously. This gives you a sense of the topography there. In that flat lowland area is where all of this food hub for the region exists. We have been working with our technical team, in particular HR&A advisors, you heard from Jamie Springer earlier, and Level Infrastructure, to do a lot of cost-benefit analysis, to think about the specific, what is the right height for this levee. We do an enormous amount of analysis to set the design parameters for the project. So, spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet, looking at each individual business and then how those add up, to demonstrate to our constituency here that we understand that this is a business decision. It's not a design decision that, the landscape architects would like the levee to be so high because that creates a great public experience. This is a place where you have to be super hard-nosed, and so we're working hard to do that. It's also a place where there is this incredible continuity of public ownership. That's about 390 acres in dark blue that's publicly owned, that's continuous. And you can think about making a levee that without all of the normal hassles of working with many, many owners. And that is largely the rationale for the phasing of the project. This is the most high-value stuff, but it's also the continuously publicly owned stuff. But in later phases of the project, we would move around the lower South Bronx. The first lifeline is called Levy Lap. This is basically a response to the fact that You have an enormously varied shoreline here, lots of different kinds of ecologies, lots of different water energies. The Long Island Sound is right here, so there's a lot of energy on this face, but this is very quiet water and very shallow water, and there's a lot of ecology. So moving bit by bit, you have many, many different conditions there and different possibilities for someplace you can have a generous public space, someplace you're going to have a wall. We were quite inspired by the Thames River experiments, which have been ongoing for quite a while. They rigorously studied a number of different implementations and then perfected them over time to look at what does cultivate the most ecology, what does reduce the amount of force on the buildings behind it, and studied that over a period of time. The University of Pennsylvania can bring to bear its sciences departments to work on measuring the outcomes of a Levy Lap type strategy. So what we've proposed and what the regulators in New York are really interested in, what the city is interested in, is the idea that there might be a real working waterfront palette of workhorse materials, things that are known and tested, but then those get integrated with smaller examples of an experimental material palette that work across that diverse shoreline. And then we study and closely monitor and evaluate which ones seem to be doing the most work. In order to convince people that we are technically able and not just philosophically able, we have to study all of the super gruesome details of every single one of these industrial properties, because the businesses need to know that we understand what their operations are like, what's going to happen in their yard, and what the actual conditions are. This is not a dune situation. It's often a situation where you have something not very publicly attractive, like a truck loading dock, right adjacent to what's going to be a very thin and fairly vertical public space. And so we have to think strategically about, how do you work within that very short section that's different from some of the things that Jay was showing to create something that has public amenity, but that is also very practical for both sides of that wall. Some places we have more space and we can really start to put in ecology that's not decorative. It's a meaningful scale. It's not a fringe wetland. It can be quite productive. And so you get something that starts to look more like this. And there are locations where we can also work with the community to think about, what does the local community-based organization that's doing a rowing program, what kind of facility would make their rowing program a lot more effective? In some places, we can start to balance the cut and fill. We're building into the water in many areas, so we need to balance that on site within the same project by cutting back a slope that doesn't offer much ecology at all, and starting to create things like this, which are, in the upland reaches, it'll be a freshwater treatment area, and then it grades into a tidal inlet. And all of a sudden we start to have some amenity and also some ecology of significant scale. In order to do that, we have to dig out a huge amount of contaminated material that is where that inlet will be. There was a coal gasification plant here and a number of other nasty things over the years. So we're proposing to actually excavate the contaminated material and lock it up in geotubes or other kinds of landfill-style liners, and to use that as our building material to get these levees high. It reduces the cost significantly, and it gets rid of all the contaminated material, and it makes it possible to have some real ecology on the site. Livelihoods is the most important lifeline to the neighborhood. If you think about, in 1938, the Civilian Conservation Corps was out one sandbag at a time, one man at a time, creating hurricane protection. And we used to think of it as very normal for communities to participate in their own protection. But now we tend to think of these giant resilience investments as going to the Army Corps of Engineers or huge construction companies that are going to come and build something. And the Hunts Point community has really put it to us that they'd like us to find ways that we don't bypass them, that they get to participate in some of this economic investment that's going to happen. And so we've looked at a whole bunch of ways to link jobs in the community with different funding sources at the federal level, at the state level, from private philanthropies, and from the city, to think about how we could possibly, in the design and construction phase, increase jobs, in the operational phases. So the Levy Lab monitors are local youth working with science faculty at the university. There are people cultivating the landscape and maintaining all of these higher maintenance measures that we're talking about. There are also artists from the neighborhood working with our design team to create things that are part of the design project. Thanks. And we also think about, one of the main ways that we're really going to create jobs here is we're going to make a high and dry area that creates a lot of private investment, and that will generate a lot of new jobs. But trying to develop strategies around the livelihoods lifeline is key to the development of the project. In terms of clean ways, these are not really, there's nothing new here that you haven't heard of. This is not one of the areas that's about innovation. It's really just about acting on long-term plans of the community and thinking about ways that you start to get this connective framework all throughout the Bronx, and bring people out to what is the giant open space of the water that they know they don't have access to because all the industry and all the fences block their access to that enormous space. And also trying to get them out on the water. So there's lots of docks, there's lots of ways to get in boats and to do things, and to move by ferry as part of a larger system. We're looking at some things about air quality innovations and thinking about how you can more strategically intercept the effluent from the 13,000 trucks that move through Hunts Point every day. We're also looking at access to food, which is a big issue here. This is a food desert, even though there's so much plenty. And we are working with the private philanthropies in the city of New York to think about ways that food security can also both create jobs and extend the food to the neighborhood. The maritime supply chain is an idea that our marine engineers came up with, and we're really quite excited about it. There are a number of programs that are in the long-term works, the Marine Highways Program, the Cities Readiness Program, where people are looking at not just in emergency, but in regular times, how do you increase maritime freight usage? Less trucks on the road and greater use of maritime resources. Hunts Point is a great place for this. It also, if we make it high and dry, it has all of these warehouses and facilities. It becomes a great hub for an emergency supply chain. So we're working with the city's Office of Emergency Management to figure out logistically how do we connect with all of these other supply locations and think about Hunts Point as serving this much bigger resilience role in the event of a storm. And that could, when our tunnels flood, we don't have movement of cars and trucks for a long time. So it's not just for us that the maritime delivery system gets up faster and we can go to Red Hook and other places, but it's also for the entire region. And finally, we're looking at power, and we've looked at backup power for the peninsula. How do you keep the juice up so that the refrigeration is consistent? But then we're looking at a trigen option with our engineers to think about how we can significantly reduce the carbon output and the efficiency of the power that's generated here. And the businesses love this because that is their giant cost. So we're trying to set up a whole set of relationships that give the businesses something, that give the community something, that everyone is willing to compromise in a very long-term stalemate that they've had. Our consultation has been focused on the community side. We do meetings at night. We're super engaged. We also do meetings at lunchtime down in the business community, in the conference rooms. We serve lunch, and the businesses come in. Much of what we do is very old school kind of consultation, but we've also been recognizing that people rarely get in the same room here. The city, the businesses in the food distribution hub, and the community never really get in the same room. We've been videotaping all of the different parties and making a film with a videographer so that they can see each other and hear each other talk about what their issues are. And we've also come up with a new event. in this place in particular, but in New York in general, we unite around food. So we're holding an Iron Chef competition that all of the local restaurants and food distributors are participating in. They will make the food. Also, some Wildcat culinary high schools in Hunts Point are entering teams in our competition. They will make the food for our next public meeting, which is always an incentive for more people from the community to come. And it should be a great way to get out all of the players and a lot of youth. And so we're trying to find some ways to create common ground with the project here. That's all.